from Ian Teeling, who says, "What is the one thing that makes you proud when you watch the films and say, I did that?" The Topoka City battle between Obi-Wan and Jango. The Topoka City. So there's a shot online with me and Tori Beleche working on Topoka City buildings. That was actually a wonderful murderer's row of some of my favorite people at ILM that built those buildings. Brian Gernan was the lead supervisor on the model shop on episode 2. In that main big room for Topoka City was me, Tori Beleche, John Goodson, John Duncan, Dave Fogler. I mean, just like some of my favorite humans, let alone some of my favorite craftspeople to work with. And in Topoka City, there were several low-lying buildings, and then there was this big hero building with this big sort of almost like a submarine conning tower on top. And I got brought in late to do that hero building, and Brian brought me in. It's like, you have 2.5 weeks. That's all that you have. But you got to churn it out. We just need to get this done. And that is something I miss. There is something that I really miss about that kind of high tension, especially, I will admit, that group of modelers, we were all quite competitive with each other. And that was a delight, because you'd be working, like, you're trying to do the best job you can. You also want to do a little better than that guy. You want to do a little faster, and you want to show off, and you want to exult in the delight of what you get to do. And all of that was extant on that Topoka City build. What I didn't know when I built the building, and Brian said, this is a hero building. The detail needs to hold up no matter how close we put the camera. So you get told that, you really pay attention. And there's this point after you do the main detail, you do vacuum forms, and then I use a secondary vacuum form to panelize the outside of it. And then the tertiary vacuum form to add more paneling. And then I did the conning tower. And then I started adding styrene strip. And then I made this palette of little tiny greeblies. And I sat there with it was really neat, a palette with edges on it. And here is a little, the underside of a soda can filled with Weldon 3. And I've got this like bin full of little tiny parts from like 1/600th scale battleships and all these tiny things. And I'm taking them with tweezers and dipping them in the glue and attaching them to the side and dipping them in the glue. And this is the best part of any modeling, when you're doing that final pass and, coming up with these patterns, and they use the universal greebly and everything. And then when the movie comes out and Jango and Obi-Wan have their whole battle on the landing platform of Topoka City, the entire background behind them is my model. It is like about 16 inches wide, of maybe even less, of my model, and it's filling the screen. And like, I have 2 of those in my film career. The other one is the payload bay of Space Cowboys, when Clint Eastwood leaves the airlock in Space Cowboys, which is a sweetly delightful film, by the way. You should watch it. When Clint Eastwood steps out of the airlock, that is a CG Clint with his face like plastered into the spacesuit, but he steps out into my model. And when that airlock opens, what fills the screen is a 12-inch wide model that I made. I mean, I spent 6 months on it. It was great. Thank you for letting me tell that story. Matt Holbrook Bull. Holbrook Bull. That's a mouthful of a name. Hi from the UK. Hello, UK. I hope to visit you again someday. Maybe by boat. Who knows? What or who is your most favorite Star Wars universe character, and why? From any episode, including the new Disney ones. P.S. Thank you for keeping us sane during these crazy days. You are welcome. I am doing it as much for myself as for anyone else. But frankly, these live streams are a huge part of what makes this bearable for me too. I did a couple of meet and greets for Silicon last week. Virtual meet and greets where people paid for a couple of minutes of personal time with me on a video chat. And I'm here to tell you, it was really, really great. It felt like going to a con. I came home the same amount of elated that I do after any kind of fan receiving line, because I find doing those meet and greets super invigorating. They wire me up and I can't sleep for hours afterwards. It's really lovely. So you're welcome. My favorite character, I mean, it's Han and Chewbacca. It's Han and Chewbacca. It's Han and Chewbacca. They are a singular entity to me. It's not just Han. Han. I know there's a distinction, and I don't make it in my head, so I'm sorry if it's driving you nuts how I pronounce it. Mr. Solo. It's not just Han Solo, because I'm never going to be as cool as Han Solo. So I can't quite fully identify with that character because he is the epitome of cool, and I'm not. I've accepted that. Only recently. But Han, I think that's right. But Han and Chewbacca together, they make a team. And they make a team with a with the ethos that infuses my entire existence. It is an ethos of working with what you've got, in situ resource utilization. It is a team based on a really great moral code. Han pretends that he doesn't have a moral code, but keeps showing up at the right moment to help the good guys because can't let a bad thing lie. And that speaks highly of that character. And Chewie is not just loyal. He's not a pet. He's a partner in every sense of the word. And the two of them could build anything and fly anything. I mean, that is a great pairing. I consider them one entity. And so my answer to that is Han and Chewie. Yeah, and I have cosplayed as both of them. I have an excellent Han Solo outfit, although I was recently thinking of redoing the belt simply because I have a really good sewing machine now and I could do the belt from scratch. And that's a one-day build that's in my plan, Han Solo belt. But Chewie, when you cosplay as those two, Chewie is the one, man. Chewie, like walking around a con dressed as Chewie is like walking around the world dressed as George Clooney, or I guess now it'd be like Ryan Reynolds. Yeah, George Clooney's no longer a huge movie star. Like he's a movie star from the past, right? Isn't that weird? Now we have new movie stars. We have Oscar Isaac. We have Timothée Chalamet. Can you tell I watched the Dune trailer like 40 times this weekend? Yeah, I did. And yes, in response to your question, I'm already thinking about that still suit as a potential cosplay. Peter Ferguson. That name sounds familiar. I think I might know Peter Ferguson. Peter Ferguson says, hey, I would like to know if any of your prop making for Star Wars, was there a favorite kit or other source you used for your greeblies? Yeah, I've covered this before. I don't think I have one up there now. Look, the Tamiya and Hasegawa military kits, and not the super big scale, small scale ones like the battleships, but like the mid scale, like 172 and one, when you're building a tank and it's this big, whatever scale that is, those kits from Hasegawa and Tamiya, the tooling is so beautiful on those parts, and the little pieces, the little greeblies that come out of those. The Anzio Annie is a really important kit for Star Wars models. The Flakvierling, the railway gun, I think that's the one that houses the universal greebly. And then there's also there's some Airfix kits, like the Space 1999 Airfix was a great one, and that was used extensively by British model makers on Alien and other films being made at Pinewood around that time. But for me, it's Tamiya and Hasegawa. Those two are just my favorite parts and bits to work with. At ILM, we used some of those parts with such incredible frequency that we actually would make up cards with little details glued to it. And then we'd make a silicone mold of that. So whenever the mold makers had overpour, they would just pour extra greeblies, and we would use those. And I have buckets of them around here. Actually, I was doing some. I pulled out an old costume last week, and I was doing some work on it, and I was doing some detailing, some greebly detailing. And so I pulled down. I have an entire shelf up there behind me that's devoted only to aesthetic details like that, like greeblies. And it's super unorganized, and I was looking at it, and it's time to get it organized because I'm using it more and more. I'm doing more of that. All right, Kerry Shanahan says, can you discuss scale and how you decide and figure out what scale you should make something? It's always puzzled me. Like the nightclub in episode 2, that scale was often had to be corrected by CGI. How do you decide what scale to build, and how do you keep it consistent? On episode 2, that decision was made for me. And it was actually based, I think it came out of the camera department. You know, the camera department looks at everything is balancing all of these elements against each other. Camera department would prefer to have everything full size if they could. They would always like things to be in as big a scale as possible because that nets the best kind of shots, but that's also expensive. And so there's all this push-pull between producers and camera and the modeling departments and all of that stuff. That being said, it also depends on the talent of your model makers, and it depends on what the object is going to do. If you're making something that's going to blow up, the scale you build it in becomes really important. Specifically because as it blows up, if you choose too small a scale, the chunks that it blows into will be too large. There's a great example of this scale in the first Superman movie, the Christopher Reeves Donner film. It's wonderful. It's a lovely film, but some of the special effects have not stood the test of time. And the dam breaking and the water rushing out, if you watch it now, you will see it looks like it was built here in my shop. It's not huge. There are like water droplets the size of Volkswagen traveling through the frame as that dam breaks. And that is a terrific example of like just not choosing the right scale, but it's also probably informed by a whole bunch of factors, including the fact that it's hard to get money on a film to add money to your special effects. So the producer might just tell you, you have to do everything with X. And then the special effects department, it just only has that amount of money to work with. So it's not any one person's fault. Like I said, it's always a balance between things on this. On Lord of the Rings, famously, they had the ability to make their scale models really huge and coined the term bigature because their tiny scale models like of Minas Tirith are actually like 15 feet high. But what that gave them at that scale was a tremendous amount of, like, the camera couldn't get too close. That's the kind of work they do there. That's the kind of work we did at ILM when we got to build that large. On The Matrix, actually, I got to work on a bigature for well over a year. On the Matrix sequels, when you finally meet Zion and you see the dock where the Mjolnir and the other ships come in, that dock was a bigature. The entire center elevator assembly was probably about this by this by about this. And then the long walkways, those were all practically built. Tons and tons of laser cutting. Fawn Davis and I were running this 4x8 Beam Dynamics laser cutter. Man, we so abused that thing. We could, by the end of that production, we could take it apart and put it back together because, like, when you operate a laser cutter at that level, you were constantly having to fix it. And Beam Dynamics was great. They would send people out and they would fix it, but also Fawn and I ended up doing a lot of fixing ourselves. But yeah, again, those decisions were almost always made well above my pay grade. This video was made possible by Tested Channel Membership. Click join below to learn more about this channel membership. It's a brand new way for you to support us, interact with us, and to help us make the great content that you love to watch and that we so dearly love to make.